All right, well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming out quite early. It's quite an honor to speak here today in front of everyone. You know, Abner and I are used to doing oftentimes big investor meetings and, you know, every word counts. Well, guess what? With a bunch of Jewish business leaders, every word counts. So, again, just good morning and thank you. I'll just give a brief of myself, and then I'll let Abner introduce himself too. But as Alex mentioned, I grew up in Philadelphia, went to school in California, went back home to Philly, to Phoenix, to Boston, to California, to Phoenix, to Tucson, to here. So arrived here in 2010. I joined Valmont as the CIO, information officer, as opposed to investment officer. And I did that for about 3 years. Then I was given the role of Vice President of our global operations in the irrigation segment, so the pivot business that we have. I did that for 1 year, and then I was given a business as the president of our utility business, which at the time was dropping like a knife, and anytime you grabbed it, you were going to get cut and hurt. But I'll come back to that in just a quick minute. I was made then COO in 2017, and 2018 was made president and CEO of the company. So it's been a fabulous ride at Valmont. For those of you who don't know, we are more than just a pivot business. It is the lifeblood of the company. It's what started the company with Robert Doherty 77 years ago. And it was a machine that wouldn't run. It broke down all the time. There's famous stories that Mr. Doherty has and letters that he received from really upset customers of how it affected them and even their personal lives, because this machine that someone had invested in had not run. But it is a story of persistence, right? And we like to say there's a lot of startups out there that started in garages. Valmont started in a garage in Valley, Pennsylvania, or in Valley, Nebraska, right next to the train tracks. We still use that same building today, which was the original building, and it houses our tubing operation. And it was a garage, and then we have rights to the land, and end up now we have 270 acres out there. It's our largest single facility globally, with about 3,000 employees out of our 11,000 employees around the world. What started out as just pivots is now turned into a $4.3 billion company with 83 facilities around the world. So we make now also a lot of infrastructure products. So every time you see a steel utility pole, you see a steel lighting pole as you drive down the street, the traffic signal poles, telecom towers, everything that's galvanized. So when you see that shiny, kind of grayish, surface prep on metal, we're one of the largest galvanizers in the world. So we do things that people see every single day. You cannot drive pretty much anywhere in the developed world without seeing our products. But you just drive by and you take them for what they are, right? But we bring food. You know, under pivot, you're going to grow 70% more food globally under a pivot than you would just dry land, right? We can now do technology where we can change, as the pivot goes around the field, how much it waters 3,600 times. It can change the flow. We can censor things from any picture, whether it's space, a drone, your own camera on the plant. And we were able to pull out potato beetles that are sitting on potato plants down to that level on a huge field. So think of millions of plants per acre. And we could tell you where there's problems with pest, fertigation, chemigation, whatever it happens to be. That's the advanced technology that we've done recently through our acquisition of Prospera out of Israel. But that's a little bit about the company, right? It really is involved with the developing world. So if you need food and you need to have infrastructure, we're a part of it. In the developed world, we're a part of regenerating all this to the next generation, right? Much of our infrastructure is crumbling. A lot of bridge and highway money is out there right now to replace a lot of what's going on. You have LED conversions, you have energy transition. For those of you that don't know, one of our single biggest product lines is our utility business. And utility, we supply all the transmission towers, not the tinker toy looking ones, that's lattice structures, but the monopoles. And as we're transitioning energy, if you take a 1 gigawatt coal plant offline, you're usually going to replace it with maybe 10 solar plants or a mix of solar and wind, maybe even a smaller natural gas plant in that mix. But now to do that, you need 10 times more substations, and you need 10 times more lines. Because where it used to come out at 1 gig, go toward the city, drop down, get transformed, distributed out to the city, now you have to do that out of multiple locations. So that's going to be a big driver for our business as we look ahead over the next decade to 2 decades. Just to give a reference, you may have heard the California law that they want to have all heavy trucks, or at least half of the heavy trucks, be electric by 2035. They would need 3 times more generation capacity than they have today. Right, so there's brownouts today. They would need 3x more power on electrically generated in order to do that. If we were to just have 25% of the people in Omaha plug in at the same time every day their car when they got home, we would melt the transformers on the poles. So it's, in theory, it's a good thing. It makes sense. But the timelines with which they have it, with the grid that goes with it, all you have to do is look at Europe and know that that's not a reality. Europe generates a ton of electricity that they cannot distribute around the continent, right? And that's the big, there's money that has to go both ways. Yes, you can generate power, and there's a lot of money in generating the power, but if you can't distribute it, it doesn't do you much good. But they will have to come through all of the neighborhoods. Poles will have to be changed, wires will have to be made bigger, transformers will have to be made bigger in order to go through this energy transition, right? Anybody who knows in the summer when air conditioning in the neighborhood all goes on and your lights flicker a little, well, imagine now plugging in a car, which is like 5 washing machines simultaneously. Okay, so it's going to be a big driver for our business as we move forward. Let me hand it over to Abner. I want him to explain who he is and a little bit about his background and how we maybe met. I think would be good.
Thank you, Steve. I was trying to remind Steve, I need to go first, not after Steve. So Abner Applebaum. I actually was born and raised in Israel. Spent there my first 30 years, went to Israeli army, spent there 3 years, mandatory service. Went to Bar-Ilan University, started my career, typical accounting and Ernst & Young, and then took a job with Tyco. Out of the blue, CFO calls me one day, he's like, hey, I'd love you to come work for us in our headquarters in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I had 2 young kids at the time, we had 2 young kids at the time, and like, okay, let's go, we'll check it out. And we said, sure, it'd be great, before our kids start kindergarten in 3 years, let's go to the States. And of course, here I am, 25 years later. So we started our journey at Harrisburg and then moved on to Connecticut, where we spent 8 years, still with Tyco. Fun times, whoever followed the news at the time, we had exciting times at Tyco with our CEO and CFO doing things they shouldn't have done. Good lesson for me as I'm kind of working through my career. And then we moved to Boston, where we raised all our kids, for our 3 kids, for about 12 years. And kept working corporate America in various roles. Worked for Belden, which I'll come back in a minute to. And some private equity gigs, and then literally out of the blue, about 3 years ago, Steve gives me a call, and I worked with Steve at Belden, now it's probably 18 years ago or so, and he's like, hey, I'm looking for CFO in Omaha, Nebraska, and I still remember my wife's in the kitchen in the background. She's like, who's that? I'm like, Steve. And she's like, what does he want? He says, well, he's got this opportunity in Omaha, Nebraska. And she's like, so why are we having this conversation? So Steve's good salesman, and he, shared the vision, his vision, the company, and I'm like, let's come out to Omaha and check it out. And we knew very little, and almost everybody that comes out to Omaha and comes and sees the community, they're all pleasantly surprised because they don't really know what to expect. And same for us, we didn't know what to expect, and it looked like a great community, a great place to live. Our kids are already done with schools. Our youngest is in just now still in college, so was a great opportunity. Although she wasn't that excited, she wanted to stay near home. She went to Boston University, and we decided to go a little further away. We've been here for 3 years, and actually the kind of story with Steve, I use it a lot with my kids, with my friend. My oldest son works in Amazon, and he's like, nobody knows what I'm doing, nobody's noticed. It doesn't matter. I'm like, sure it does. I said, here's a great example. You just do your best, be a good person, leave a good impression, and good things will happen. So it's a story I like to share because, after all those years, I guess I did something good back then that Steve remembered and brought me here. And I've been here for 3 years, and it's been a great ride, great journey. Came right at COVID, so it's been challenging day one. So it took a while to kind of get to meet people, to make friends, to see the community. It's a great company to work for, which we'll share a little bit more throughout the morning. And I'm excited to be here. We love it here, actually. My wife's like, we live out in Westeros on the lake, and she just likes to wake up in the morning and see the water, and she's happy. We're all happy. So that's a little bit about myself.
Yeah, so Abner and I worked for Belden, which was a wire and cable company. I was living in Tucson, Arizona at the time, running our Mexican operations down there. So I would drive across the border every day for about 8 years, and both pre 9/11 and post 9/11. So it was quite a difference between the two. Used to be an hour down, cross, easy, come back maybe an hour and 10 minutes. And then it moved to 2.5 hours. And so everything changed pretty quickly. And, we had met, and we only worked together a little over a year.
Yeah.
But he left an impression with me of being extremely confident and asking good questions, like an Israeli would, actually. And he sometimes didn't even believe his own question because he was questioning the other question. But that was great from a business perspective because you could see that he was being very objective. And sometimes in business you find accountants, if they have too much of a lean, then it becomes their agenda. And I found that it's a good tag team for us. He knows I have an agenda, and he'll question me, and I need that. Right? Because oftentimes we get so wedded into our own decision making and some of our own beliefs that you need someone to really play contrarian, and that's why I brought Abner in, was to play contrarian. That I trusted in doing that, in that process, not to undermine, but to do it in such a way that would help the company. And for reference, since this guy arrived, we've grown over $2 billion, and we've hit record earnings probably at least 5 quarters. Our EPS has grown quite substantially. Our valuation is at an all-time valuation. So whether that was good luck or Hashem himself, I'll take which way it goes. But it's been a blessing to have him on board. One of the things that Jay had asked me to talk about was a little about my journey and just kind of how I got to where I am. And I can tell you it is one of the most circuitous routes. So I tell my kids and other kids, oftentimes when I'm doing mentoring sessions, you have no idea how your career will turn out. If you think you can plan your career today, you're nuts. So I was a sociology major, and I was in Silicon Valley, and so I did this thing called Business, Technology, and Society Emphasis. It was how are these things called computers going to change the world, because I'm old enough that it was both their pre and post computer. And it was really learning how grapevine leaders would change in organizations due to who has access to the data. Because whoever had access to the data would be a better decision maker, right? And ultimately a better grapevine leader. So they would know about what's going on with the company in a different way than had ever existed before. And so I thought that was really cool. Well, graduating in '94, when all the defense cuts in California were taking place, base closures, you name it, sounded good as a major, and turned out terribly from a financial perspective to go get a job. So then I had to move back to Philadelphia. And I did, and I was doing retail management. I had worked for a retailer. I had really done some pretty cool things as a teenager, where I actually opened stores. I went out and I contracted the union guys, I got the permits, and I built the store, and I got it initially staffed at 18 years old. Because we had a company that was kind of like really innovative and would give people whatever they could do without, you know, dying or breaking. So I went back for them for about 3 months. They got purchased. If anybody from New York knows Herman Sporting Goods, Herman Sporting Goods was the company that bought Gold Medal Sporting Goods, which is the Philly-based one. And then I was with Herman's and decided to take off, and I went to this thing called direct marketing. So there was a bunch of guys from the Franklin Mint, if you remember the collectible plates and all that. Well, one group started QVC, and another group started National Media, the infomercial company. I knew the CFO of the infomercial company. He was my neighbor. And he had seen how I worked, and I did a lot of work for him growing up. I helped him with all kinds of odd jobs, cut his grass, shoveled snow, you name it, but that's what got me the opportunity. I was made a quality assurance supervisor at the distribution center in Phoenix. That's how I got to Phoenix. So here I am. I was quality supervisor for about 3 months. I was 23, and then they said, hey, we need someone to run this facility. It was a $400 million facility. I was 23, and I had all kinds of temporary labor from 5 different rival gangs in Phoenix. It was on the south side of Phoenix. It was rough. And I was being paid $26,500 to run a $400 million facility. But I knew the experience could parlay into something more in the future. And so that's why I took it. During that time, I had 2 death threats. I had to be escorted to work for about 3 months because of gang problems, and I was the hire of their desire to take me out. So that was an interesting time period. But I learned invaluable things about business and people, right, and tough situations. So we worked till midnight. It was a public company to ship a certain product because there was a patent infringement case. Any of you guys remember the ab roller from Brenda Dycraft? So I knew Brenda, and we had to ship that product right up until December 31st at midnight. And I remember having to work with Teamsters at UPS in order to make sure they would have trucks there to take it, so it would be legal for revenue recognition. So these were things I got to do between 23 and 26. And it was fun. At 12 o'clock midnight, we had to pull everyone into the building because as the place was there, people shot their guns towards South Mountain and all the bullets would rain down. So I remember listening to the bullets, just bing, 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 bing. Right, so these were interesting but fun experiences now that I look back at it. But it did teach you that you could do anything that you really needed to do if you could convince people, if you could get them motivated, and just feel good about what was there. It wasn't pay, right? Money was never in the equation for this at the time, but it was just learning the experience. Went from that, I was offered a job in Boston with a startup company. I had 40,000 shares of nothing, and it was a software company that was targeted towards direct marketing. And it was such a niche, weird business at the time because who else put things on at night, midnight, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. Famous story from Bulgaria when we first opened that market after the Soviet Union collapsed. Anything worth $50 or more had to be sewn in a burlap bag. And I remember going to a facility and there was a bunch of old women, all that were sewing these packages in burlap bags. And they were fighting over the string because that was the limiting factor, was the string on their earning potential, right? When we went into the Emirates, we had to put one of the sheiks into the commercial, otherwise we wouldn't get the air rights to go on. Many of you guys remember Billy Mays, you know? He was always like this. And, you know, he was a fun character to be around. Mike Levy had weird sweaters that he wore for positive response television. But it was a great learning experience. Therefore, that's why this startup wanted me in Boston. Went to Boston. This is coincidence. 2 blocks away from where this guy lived later. So I was there first, and then he came and lived there later, 2 blocks from the same place, near the same shul, actually. So it was just, I went to this, it was 40,000 shares of nothing, thought it would be great. Turns out the owner was a shyster. He lied. He lied about a lot, and he would promise customers things that we weren't even close to being able to deliver. It was a software company, it was direct marketing software, and so I knew I had to get out of there quick. So in 9 months, even though I love Boston, I went to California. And I decided to work for a consulting company. I had implemented systems at National Media, one of them called QAD. And QAD is what we use still in Valmont. So coincidentally, as the world turns. And so I did that, and I consulted for a bunch of different companies. Whammo Toys, if you remember Whammo. I did Pro Chemical, the guys that make the carpet cleaners for the back of vans. I did that. I did it for Kimberly-Clark. And then a company called Thermax, which was a wire and cable company, which then got me into Belden. Belden bought the Thermax brand. I had said I wanted to get married at that point. I was working 80 hours a week. I was a great consultant. I made good bonuses because I was billing like crazy. But it's not a life you can continue for a very long period of time. I like manufacturing. I like being on the floor. And so I had implemented the system for Thermax, and basically they said, well, you know everything about our operations, run our operations. And they had to negotiate with the consulting firm because you're not supposed to hire people, but that worked out. And one of my great mentors, Bob Canny, who both Avner and I work for, he was one that really fought for me to come over. And he taught me a ton. And he taught me about pricing and the value of pricing, which is not the easiest business muscle to learn. And he also would run through, I call business chess with me all the time. This person this, that person that, what about this, if we do this, what about that customer? So we were the first supplier to Boeing outside of the US, in Mexico. And just another funny story, when 9/11 happened, they did this thing called CTPAT, about how you have to certify against terrorism and all these different things. One day, the Mexican army showed up at our facility. And I had a 5-star general, which is very unusual, even in Mexico, show up at the plant. And I had 2 M60s pointed at me and about 6 M16s. And they stayed on me for 3 hours. And if I moved like this, they moved with me. And I kept talking to the general, and he says, oh, there's drugs in that trailer. I said, well, if there's drugs, go find out. You go over there, there's not drugs there. There's maybe drugs in this trailer. Okay, go ahead. And they had dogs going in, and, well, that dog's a new dog. Let's put in a different dog. So I started really getting suspicious. And I finally tell the general, I said, unless you're detaining me, I'm leaving. And I'm going back to the United States right now. You can't do that. Well, then arrest me. So he didn't. And he ends up, because we were the very first company to have that certification anywhere in the world, we came up on the list of, well, they must be running something. Because, you know, now, we supplied the US military and Boeing with aircraft wire. So it was important for us not to have an interruption. It was vital for our business. But they took it as something fishy. So it was a fun exercise. And I remember going to our headquarters the very next day in St. Louis, and someone there said, you guys talk about going to Mexico like it's so hard. It's just like going over the George Washington Bridge in New York. And I said, oh, really? Needless to say, I had some choice words for that individual later. I invited him down, never came. But, you know, I was able to do those kinds of things. And, you know, I went from Thermax I went through Belden, I ended up becoming CIO because I had some technical background from the software side, I knew how the business worked. And then when I was hired here, I was just a CIO, right? Just a computer guy. And then they kind of discovered, oh yeah, he has an operations background. Because I kind of went back and forth throughout my career. Obviously with my major, I was writing programs to analyze data. So that came in handy because I never had to ask people to get my data. I would always go get my own data. And I could make really good decisions and I could go into meetings and sound a lot smarter than most people. My assistant Claudia is here and she knows I love to just read and I can ream off data. It's something I enjoy. I think data helps steer you. It doesn't make your decisions for you, but it sure does reaffirm your gut. So if you have a gut feel and then you have data to back it up, it really helps. When I got from the operations role into utility, which I mentioned earlier, it was a make or break. This was a business that had been $1 billion, it dropped to 700 million. It caused us to restate our guidance to the street by like $1.50 a share. At the time, we were only making around $9 a share, so it was a massive drop. And Mullins Buy said, I'd like you to go run the business. So I said, okay, well, nothing to lose except my job. Because if I fail, I'm a good scapegoat. But if I succeed, then this will be a nice feather in my cap. And I still never had any thoughts that I would ever become CEO. I wasn't like striving for it, I wasn't angling for it. In fact, there was 2 other candidates for the position. Mullins was kind of making known he wanted to retire. I was not the chosen child. But I took this falling knife and I had to close 5 facilities, raise price simultaneously, even though there was overcapacity in the market. And I remember having to go on with the analysts. I was the only president who had ever gone on with the analysts and explain why I thought this was the right strategy. And of course they told me it was fraught with danger. And I said, well, losing money is fraught with danger too, so let's just try this. We had the dominant market share. So I knew competitors would want to move on price over time, and they did. But it took 9 months, and our bid hit rates on that business went from like 42% down to 9%. So if I hadn't had Mullins backing to go through that kind of really tough period of time, it would have been hard to turn around the business. Because the public pressure to make the quarters would have kicked in enough that we would have to make a move. So, needless to say, that worked out for me. And I went through all kinds of psych evaluations and everything that they put you through now to become a public CEO, and did well. The board liked me, and I was able to become promoted. And it's a great place to be CEO. I mean, we have incredible people. We talk about our core values, passion, integrity, and those are from Mr. Doherty, right? You have to love what you're doing. You have to have utmost integrity, not just what the law says, but to go above and beyond, whether that's a supplier, a customer, whoever it is. And then continuous improvement and delivering results are Mullins, right? We have to always get better, and look, like it or not, we have to deliver results. We're in the public markets, and we have to do it. And so those have been really distinctive that I believe set Valmont apart is our culture, right? We have people that are from farm people to, data scientists in Tel Aviv that do things for the state of Israel that are still classified to this day. But they have a passion for making the world a better place. They really care about, the way that our civilization develops. Can we feed it? Can we do it efficiently? Can we help the world? Telecommunications, I can all say if we didn't have cell phones, we would start to freak out pretty quick, right? If you don't have traffic signals, and if you've traveled, you've been to countries where traffic is scary. If you don't have electricity, you can have riots in a day. It never used to be like that, but that's how it is. And then I'll turn it to Abner a little bit to talk about just kind of how the company's doing right now, what's driving us in markets, and then I'll finish up a little bit.
But we decided I'd go first. Yeah, so I was just thinking as Steve was kind of going through his career, and I'm like, oh, that sounds pretty boring. I wanted to be a CFO, I became a CFO, and yeah, but it's really like Steve said, you know, I joined 3 years ago, and I like to kid when I have meetings with maybe the banks, and they show the charts of how Valmont's doing great, and I kind of look at the point on the bottom around March 2020, I'm like, what really happened here? And they're like, well, there was COVID, there was infrastructure bill, and I'm like, no, there's a new CFO that joined the company. So, you know, timing's everything. But it's really, I used to say it's fortunate that Valmont is where they are, where we are right now, but it's not really luck. I think it's a lot of strategy that Steve and prior to Steve kind of really running the company. It's like where should we be? Sure, they started with pivots, but adding a lot into capabilities in agriculture, adding the technology. Steve was mentioning Prospera, then going into really spaces that are really growing. So I think there was a lot of really good putting the cash to work where it could drive value. You know, some of the recent acquisition going into renewable energy, solar, everybody sees that everywhere. Investing in other areas where we could really provide value to our customers, to the society as a whole. You know, how do we, as one of our taglines of conserve life and conserve resources and improve life, is what we do. So Valmont, you know, is really right in the forefront of really making this world a better place. And one of the large initiatives today around ESG, and we like to say, well, that's nothing new for us, Valmont. We do that every day, and that was part of our DNA. So it's easy to be in Valmont today. I say that's not easy, but it's a good space to be in today because the markets are very strong, as Steve mentioned earlier. So it's really for us a lot of balancing act, and how do we run the business, and how do we keep on focusing on the growth? You know, what's next on the horizon? It's not only maximizing the results of today, it's how do we maximize the results of the future. So it's always that balancing act of maximizing while continuing to invest. And that's what we do, and we do it well. Keep on investing in how do we provide the value to our customers? How do we help the farmers? How can they do more with less? How do we as Valmont show them the return on investment that they can do with pivots, with technology? How do we keep on making their lives easier? You don't have to go out to the farm to check on your field. You can do it from your phone today. And we're doing the same thing. We have a lot of initiatives going around in the infrastructure side. Steve mentioned the utility, for instance. We have a lot of great initiatives going on with drones, which Steve could elaborate a little more. But we could fly drones and you know, see what's wrong with a utility pole. And we're approved by the FAA, and very few companies are approved to kind of fly out of line of sight and see, you know, is there an issue? Is there a fire? Is there no power? Any other issues? And as you know, we're trying to, for the next, you know, decades, we're going to have to keep on strengthening the grid. For decades, it's been not invested enough, and you can see a lot of the storms, the fires, the hurricanes, how they're impacting the grid, and we need to continue to invest here and globally. So overall, where I'm going with this is that there's a lot of demand out there, and we just got to make sure we put the right resources, and resources means people, resources means capital, resources mean cash. You know, how do we invest in continue to support all these global initiatives? And we have a really good foundation. We have a really strong balance sheet. We have we really, again, I can't take any of the credit. I joined a company that really did a nice job on structuring a lot of the debt, a lot of the capital. So we're very well capitalized, and we do have the opportunity to keep on investing. And as today, what is fortunate for us is not fortunate for many other companies that are not doing so well because of just the broad economy. And for us, we can be opportunistic there, and you know, where maybe companies don't have such strong backing, we can take advantage and you know, strengthen Valmont. So overall, it's a good place to be, where you have more opportunities. There are of course a lot of challenges in this environment that everybody sees in every business. It could be within hyperinflation, and for us it has a very large impact. We buy a lot of steel, and if anybody follows that market, it's very volatile. It goes up, it tripled in value over a very quick period of time, and then it dropped again. And how do we manage that when it's a significant part of our cost? And sometimes you even can't get material, and a lot of our competitors weren't able to get steel, and we use other materials like zinc. And so it's a very challenging environment managing the cost, and of course we see inflation everywhere else in labor and medical and utility and energy, and very different dynamics around the globe. Yes, we're here in Omaha, Nebraska, but we have a lot of facilities around the world, and big presence in Brazil and Australia and Dubai and Europe and Mexico, and each one of them has different dynamics. So we need to figure out, you know, what are the dynamics that are impacting those areas as it relates to inflation, availability, labor. Labor has been a really big challenge for us and many. During COVID, people didn't want to work, and it was really, there was a perfect storm. We tried to figure out, like, where are all these people? How come they don't want to work, or where are they? And I think it was a combination of some chose they wanted to stay home, some wanted to move with their parents. There was less immigration in many countries. There were people that just decided to retire early. So there was shortage of employees, and there still is, even as this economy slows down and everybody sees a layoff. It's still really hard to get employees to work in many industries, and specifically in a plant where sometimes it's tough and it's hard labor. And there's a lot of competition on getting that labor. So that's another thing that we're battling. What we do have going for us is it's a great culture. It's a great company. People like working for Valmont, and that's huge, because that's important. Just about a month ago or so, there was an event that we have a lot of employee resource groups, and there was a soccer tournament on a Sunday. And so myself and my wife says, you know, let's go out and let's check it out. And it was amazing to me. There were, I don't know, 60, 70, 80 employees there playing soccer, having a good time with their family, having picnic, and I'm like, wow. On a weekend, people that want to come and spend time with their coworkers, and to me, that's amazing. I have not seen that anywhere else. So for us, as we try to attract employees, it's easier for us because it's a company that cares about their employees, and it's a really good working environment. So we have a lot of challenges between, like I said, the supply chain, the inflation, the labor availability, but we've been navigating through it really well. And as Steve mentioned, the results kind of show that we're doing a nice job, but it's challenging, but at least when you have the market tailwinds, that's definitely helpful.
Yeah, one of the things that I think COVID really taught us, so it was hard enough in the States, right, with COVID restrictions, by city, by state, well, we're in 23 countries. So, and I think our total jurisdictions that we dealt with were about 110. And everyone had different rules. And I had my own personal feelings. I stepped out of it. I gave it to a task force, and the task force dealt with it local by local, because everyone has different opinions around the world. And who are we from Omaha, Nebraska, to tell our Indonesia plant how they should do their COVID restrictions, right? that's a job title way above my grade. That's elected people that should be doing that. And so we took the stance very early on, whatever the elected politicians are willing to do is what we're willing to do. Because otherwise it's my opinion. And it could be, oh, it's science-based, or it could be this. No, it's not, it's our opinion. And so that's what worked out well for us. We had record earnings through COVID because we let our people really do what they needed to do to mitigate the risk from their own perspective, from their own backgrounds, right? India was different than Indonesia, which was different, as we know, than Australia, which was like basically shut down. China, we lost our 4 plants for a period of time there too, despite that record earnings, because people were willing to do what they needed to do in the other facilities around the world. You know, one of the things that we do is we sell to every country on earth except 3. Cuba, North Korea, and Iran. The State Department won't let us. Okay? But every other place, because we deal with food, we can get special licenses even with sanctions. We sold to Sudan. I visited Sudan, met the guy who's in the news right now, the General Fatah, right? We have to be able to provide food for the world. It's a level of doing business that really sits above and beyond what even most people are used to dealing with. Right? When you're talking about feeding people, and literally these countries can have civil war. If you go back to the Arab Spring, it was a 1 cent increase in bread that tripped off the Arab Spring. Think of how many countless people died over that, governments overthrown, etc. That's the kind of politics we're in. It's a different kind of politics, but it's very almost UN-like, because you're coming in as a neutral party oftentimes. And then it's just a matter of how do you get paid, right? In Sudan, can you imagine trying to get paid in Sudan when the currency itself is boycotted? We have to go through all kinds of rigmarole to do that, but that's what makes it fun, it makes it different. It reminds me of my direct marketing days, right? Because it's how do you pull this off? And our teams come together every day and they do this. And it's really amazing to watch, right? I'm proud, I can get up here, I can talk about it like I was the one who did. No, it's not, it's them. And one of the things that I've learned over time is the culture, right? I'm supposed to do strategy and capital allocation and talent. Those are the 3 biggies that CEOs do. But culture is this kind of analogous fourth. How do you define it? What is it, right? Mr. Doherty, Mullins had a great culture too. And yet I'm operating differently than Mullins ever operated. And he's letting me. But what's not changed is the culture, right? And I think that's the key to maintain. That is really the intangible asset in our books, is that our people find ways to do things in parts of the world that you could never imagine doing. And I think that's my most important role, is you're allowed to fail. Now you can't keep failing, right? But if him and I worked for a CEO, that the day you messed up was the day you got called out in public, and if you responded, you were probably gone in 2 minutes. That was a terrible culture. Because while you pushed for excellence, people were afraid to take risk. What we have here, I think, is a great blend of taking risks, pushing the envelope, having a little chutzpah, right? Being willing to make a mistake. Yes, you can't continue to make mistakes, you'll get counseled. But at least, because if we were trying to control this from Omaha, Nebraska, for everything that goes on around the world with 11,000 people, it'd be impossible. And again, that's why that culture, passion, integrity, continuous improvement, delivering results is so important. And I thank my predecessors for establishing that culture, because without it, it would be even a heavier lift trying to change our business and our paradigms and the businesses we're in. You know, he mentioned the drone business. We do more than Amazon and Walmart combined. We can take up 80-pound payloads, we can fly outside the line of sight. We developed non-Chinese drones with Intel and Sony. We do really cool things. We can analyze the roads, we can analyze 15,000 utility poles and have machine learning look at it all and say where the anomalies are. There's very few people that can do that, right? That's gonna be the next wave of Valmont. just like in the agriculture space, right? Recurring revenue, moving into that space. But it's changing the makeup of our company and who's involved. But they still have the same culture, right? Prospero, when we bought them, said they're engineers in muddy boots. Yeah, they used to make stuff that could intercept Iron Dome type stuff, and now they're doing it for agriculture to help feed. And so that's that passion that they have. So I want to thank everyone for the conversation today, and Jay, if there's any questions, I'm sure we could take a few.
Yeah, we have time for a few questions.